So, axis of rotation and centre of mass that will affect a sprinter. To start with, we have to know about the different phases of a race. So during a race, there are 3 different phases. The first of all, there is the preparation phase. This is where the runner is in the blocks before they start the race. This goes from when the official says on your marks to get set. Secondly, there's the execution phase. This part is otherwise known as the dry phase. This runs from when the official says go to the first 10 to 20 meters of the race. Finally, there's a follow-through stage. This is a stage where the runner is at full velocity and lasts the final 80 to 90 meters of the race. And that's a look at what the dry phase is when they come out of the blocks. Then there's classes of levers in the body. There are many different levers in the body, and they're found at joints and made from bones and muscles and ligaments. There are 3 different aspects to levers, classes of levers. The fulcrum, this is the axis at which the movement takes place. The effort, what causes a force of movement, for example, the muscle. And then there's the load, or otherwise known as the weight or resistance. So this could be something along the lines of a gravitational force or a weight. And these are just the different classes of levers. First of all, you have the first class lever. This would be seen when the agonist and antagonistic muscle groups on either side of the joint axis are contracting simultaneously with the agonist producing force whilst the antagonist applies the resistance. This could be seen in something like a basketball player going in for a rebound after the ball hits the backboard of the hoop. This is because as the athlete is running to get the rebound, they're looking to see where the ball is and trying to make a judgment of where it's going to be. The second class lever is designed to produce forceful movements. For example, this could be when a tennis player is going for a serve in the game. It's seen as when the player is going up onto their toes to reach for the ball to strike it in the air. They're forcing their body up and through their calves. Finally, the third class lever, and this would be an example of this would be as if an athlete was doing a bicep curl. This is because they're using their elbow as the axis, and the bicep applies the force. Whilst the weight is the load that is making it harder for them to complete the bicep curl. Then there's different axes of rotation. There are 3 different axes of rotation of movement which allows the body or body parts to rotate in a certain way. First, there's a vertical axis. This is a line that runs from your head to your toe. Secondly, there's a sagittal axis. This is a line that runs from the front of your body to the back of it. Finally, there's a transverse axis, and this would be a line from the through the body from the left to the right. An example of the frontal axis would be a person performing a somersault. No. Sorry. An example of the frontal axis would be someone performing a somersault, and the frontal axis is otherwise known as the transverse axis. This is because as they're moving, the only way that they could move is if they were to roll forward or do a cartwheel roll. If you were to imagine that there was a pole going through one side of your body to the other, you wouldn't be able to move on any other kind of axis, only going through that frontwards roll. This would mean that there are only... An example of the sagittal axis would be a person performing a cartwheel. This is seen as if they had a pole running through the front of the body to the back again. This only allows them to move on the axis and not deviate from it. Finally, an example of a vertical axis would be someone like a figure skater rotating or spinning on the spot. This could be imagined as if they had a pole that was running from the top of their head through to the bottom of their body. This only allows them to move in that circular motion. What is centre of mass? Centre of mass is the point at which the mass around it is all equal. This can also be known as centre of gravity. In the body, the person's centre of mass is around their belly button. However, when they move their arms upwards, the centre of the mass in the body is around the belly button. This is because a human top half of the body is a lot heavier than the bottom half. One position that makes the body's centre of mass change is when someone holds their hands above their head. This is because when their arms move upwards, the mass of the top of the body changes and makes the body position more top heavy. Another would be when a person was to bend at their hips. By this point, their centre of mass has shifted outside of their body and is now in front of it. This is because the top of the body comes down and the weight moves once again. Finally, if someone was to lift both their legs at a 90-degree angle, their centre of mass would again be outside of their body. This is due to the person pointing their feet out in front of them. In turn, this would allow the body to be in its most stable position. As an athlete grows, their centre of mass will increase. Furthermore, if an athlete was to put muscle mass, in particularly around their chest and shoulders area, their centre of mass would increase. However, this would mean their stability would decrease. This could be seen in such a sport as powerlifting. This is because they have a larger chest area, and when they get the bar over their head, they adopt a different stance to give themselves a wider base. In turn, this would increase their stability and allow them to keep their weight above their head for a longer time without falling or risking dropping the bar onto themselves. On the other hand, if an athlete was to put fat around their trunk area, their centre of mass would be lower and their stability would then increase. This could be seen in the sports such as sumo wrestling. This is because if an opponent was to lunge at them, then their centre of mass lunge at them and they had a lower centre of mass, they wouldn't be able to be bullied around the ring and pushed out of it easy. There is a key relationship between centre of mass and stability. It is seen by the fact that if they have a lower centre of gravity, they end up being more stable on their feet. This could be seen in sports such as wrestling. However, the taller that someone is, the higher that their centre of mass will be, and in turn, this will reduce their stability. This could be seen in such a sport as basketball, as they're running down the court at high speeds and they're fairly tall. As they're running down the court at high speeds, they may find it hard to stop, and they even may slip over and not be able to keep themselves up on their feet. This is because the athlete could change their centre of mass to increase this. This is because an athlete could change their centre of mass to increase their stability, which in turn could improve the athlete's performance in a game or training situation. If you were to look closely at some athletes, especially a rugby player, when they sidestep, they would get lower to the ground and adopt a wider stance with their feet. This allows them to have a wider base, which they can keep on their feet and avoid falling or tripping themselves over. Furthermore, an example of how different athletes can manipulate their centre of mass would be like a rugby player. Again, with the sidestepping around their opponent, they would try to get as close to the ground as possible. This is because they make themselves more stable as they have a wider base underneath them. This means it makes it easier so they can perform the sidestep without slipping over. This is good for them as if they were to slip over, they wouldn't be able to get up and carry on their run. Furthermore, if they were to go to ground and none of their team would be around to ruck over them, they could get the ball turned over, which could lead to the opposing team getting a try or possibly to gain some ground back on them. Another example could be seen in gymnastics when the athlete is on the beam. This is because they need to maintain a stable position, and this is done by the athlete keeping their body as straight as possible when they're on top of the beam. This in turn allows the athlete to have their centre of mass in the same position whilst keeping the stability as well as they can. The relationship between centre of mass and stability. Classes of levers and axes of rotation used during a sprinting race. All of the classes of levers are being used in this drive phase of the sprint. The first class lever is being used at the neck because they have their head looking downwards during the preparation phase and the execution phase. However, during the follow-through stage, their head has come back up. The second class lever is used at the ankle as they're elevating and depressing their toes all the time to drive into the ground. And this is the same for the preparation phase, the execution phase, and the follow-through phase. The third class lever is used at the shoulder. This is seen by them driving their arms forwards and backwards as they are going along the race. When sprinting, during each different stage of the race, the athlete is working on the transverse axis. This is especially seen when they're coming out of the execution phase and going into the follow-through stage. This is because if you were to look at them, they're bending at the hips to come back up that final little bit, and they're bending and they're tilting their head backwards. This is all working on the transverse axis as they're only moving in that one direction, which is coming upwards and not going side to side, nor is the effort or the load after the fulcrum. At the first stage of a 100-metre sprinter, it's sprinting. The runner is close to the ground whilst they're in the blocks. From the stage of when the official says on your marks to get set, the sprinter has to change their position from having their knees on the ground to both knees being suspended in the air. This is being done by the fact that both knees and ankles are working together to provide the sprinter with the power needed to push off. One of the levers that can be seen as a second class lever this can be seen at the ankle when the sprinter has gone from on your marks to get set. Furthermore, the sprinter is moving on the transverse axis, so they have to go Furthermore, the sprinter is moving on the transverse axis as they go from on your mark to get set,